Hello YouTube, this is Hunter Surge, and today I want to talk about one of my favorite subjects in all of Vanguard, and one that is being approached in an interesting way that my opinion on is Bushwood is finally doing some design that makes my opinion shift on this. So let's talk about draw triggers. Um, Draw triggers suck. I want to get that out here as a baseline. We will talk about the issues with draw triggers as we go through this, but draw triggers at a baseline are bad. I want to talk real quick about why draw triggers are bad historically. So we're gonna save this real quick. Okay, so let us pull up. This is a deck from Break Ride era. This is the Amber Nouvelle deck that I use in Break Ride format. The specifics of the deck doesn't matter. What matters is talking about draw triggers. So in the original iteration of Vanguard, your triggers had 10k shield. Your grade 2s or less, grade 0s in general actually had 10k shield. Even starters had 10k shield. Your grade 1s and grade 2s had 5k shield, and your grade 3s had no shield. And then there's the draw trigger, which gets 5k shield. Back in the day, so draw triggers are from the start given a lower shield value, because they draw a card that's really powerful. So one, that's an immediate misevaluation of the power of the trigger types. Because when you really break it down, what a critical or a heal is doing is it's either giving your opponent additional damage or it's allowing you to heal off additional damage. And even in the earliest stages of Vanguard, doing an additional damage or healing off one of your damage earns you more than a card in card advantage. Because that is now a card that you don't have to get out of your opponent's hand, right? That is like if your opponent has additional damage on them because of a critical, right? That is one less damage that they can take. That means that bare minimum, there is one less attack that they can save a card in their hand by not guarding. But the way Vanguard decks are always constructed, even going all the way back, you're trying to make as many of your attacks as possible require 2 cards, which means very often, even in those earliest stages of Vanguard, applying additional damage to your opponent is worth more than 1 card. And if your opponent has to guard with 5Ks, it's worth 2 cards, even on a basic 2-stage attack. That's the basic statistics of what damage does. And stand triggers are similar. Stand triggers are either, okay, you take another damage, or I'm asking you for an additional card. And as a result, draws having 5k less shield from the jump is not super justified. And it's always presented issues to the trigger type. Because it introduces some additional problems, which is that when you draw a draw trigger, it is less shield and it is reducing the amount of shield in your deck. Right? So the best case scenario for a draw trigger, of course, is you draw either one of your other triggers that isn't a draw trigger, or you draw a perfect card. And those will yield more shield value than checking another trigger type would, right? So that's good defensive value. However, that is not even half of your deck. That is, so if you assume at least 4 draw triggers in the deck, that is 16 of the cards that you can draw in a typical build, giving you additional shield than checking another trigger would have given you, right? And you also have the grade 3s, which yield no shield, in which case you have less shield in your hand than checking a normal trigger would have given you. And every other case is just a normal amount of shield. And that stuff is not great. There are cases where draws line up well, decks that care about discarding like a quantity of cards, for example. Draws line up fairly decently into, because then you care about the quantity more than the quality. But these cases were pretty rare. Most of the cases where draws were really good in the OG era were cases like Gatling Claw Dragon, or Hysteric Shirley, where the draw trigger had a really good unique effect attached to it. And as a result, you were running it not so much for the effect of the draw trigger, but for the effect of the card attached to the draw trigger. Gatling Claw is a really good example. This will just give you, this doesn't go in my real deck building slots, and it's a card that just goes, I kill my opponent's starter. So that's obviously really, really good. Like really good in old Vanguard. Then we come to V, where they come upon a new solution. Now V introduces some additional issues for draw triggers in that the shield values and power values of everything else in the game changes. The shield values of your typical trigger becomes 15k. The shield value of a heal trigger becomes 20k. Grade 2s are still 5k, and grade 1s go up to 10k. In addition to that, the power that a trigger is giving you is now plus 10k instead of plus 5k, and there's a lot more bigger power boosts going around from the jump. Like forces are giving a full plus 10k, excels are giving a full plus 10k, and these are all linked to each other because, like, okay, if the shield value goes up, right, that changes what is required for a 1-card guard. If the shield value is 15k with our new 13k base Vanguards at grade 3, that means that to force 2 cards out of my opponent, I need to be hitting for 28 instead of 21 as it was before. And that just moves a lot of things around. And that makes it really, really bad that the vanilla draws stay at 5k shield. Because before it was a situation of, okay, draw shield value is worse, and that's pretty bad, but it's not like the most unsurmountable thing, because a draw plus a non-trigger is still equaling the shield value of other trigger types, right? Attacks that you could block for only 5k were a lot more common as well. And like it was a lot easier for a draw to at least match the shield value of other trigger types when drove checked. Obviously, when damage checked, draws are really, really good. But the other trigger types have like a lot of consistent value, right? So like the situation for draws got significantly worse on face in V era. Because now the chances of matching the shield value of another trigger type when checked was just way lower. It was just way lower that this was going to happen. However, it seems that the V era designers understood the problems with draw triggers, and thus, as a result, the draw triggers, the baseline draw, we had like the basic like 5k shield draw triggers, but the big one was we got the draw perfect guards, which were the basic double rare perfect guards that every clan got was on a draw trigger now. And that made those 4 copies of your draw triggers a lot better. Because they're perfect guards. And draw triggers outside of their shield deficiencies are a really strong trigger effect. Like, that is objectively a strong trigger effect. The problem is that staple to a lower shield value, and that makes the trigger type a lot worse as a result. So when they're instead stapled to perfect guards, they become a lot better, in addition to saving space in your main board. Now, draws did also take the loss of V era, and D era by extension got rid of the concept of unique trigger effects. In original era and G era, it was extremely common from like set 1. We were getting trigger cards that they were a trigger and they had a unique effect printed on them. And that gave you a reason beyond just a trigger type to look at the trigger, right? And we're starting to see a bit of that come back. In like the Inazuma 11 collab has a lot of stuff that cares about specific trigger names. There's the critical trigger that has that very unique effect in Inazuma 11 of Soul Blast 1 to Energy Charge 2 when you guard with it. And of course there's the Buddy Fight trigger orders, which are all unique effects. You have multiple different crits with different effects, and like these are like other modes for these cards that you have to think about. But this was not the case in V, and for the main game in D, this was not the case. But draw PGs stymied the bleeding on draw triggers for quite a while until we hit D. And when we hit D, it gets even worse for draw triggers because grade ones are no longer 10k shield, so that reduces the odds of your draw trigger, your draw trigger drawing you into equivalent shield value as another trigger type even more. Perfect guards do return to being in the main deck, which is bad for the non-trigger section, which is bad for draw triggers, but also not the worst, because like in some ways it increases your overall shield value in your deck, but not if you're running draw triggers. That only increases the overall shield value in your deck if you're not running draw triggers. So at first we just have like the basic 5k shield draw triggers, right? The problem is now, unlike in V, we get these new front triggers. Front triggers exist in V, of course, but they were exclusive to the Excel clans. In D, everyone gets front triggers, and front triggers are strong. Front triggers, I would say, are like, while stand triggers are untenable in Vanguard's current design direction, where columns bodies get a lot bigger than they did back in the day, and thus stand triggers are a lot more abusable. I think on face, compared to like the original applications of stand triggers in the first like 5 years of Vanguard's life, front triggers are way stronger. Like even in the earliest state, even if you're just a 3-attack deck, that's still okay. I swing Vanguard first, I flip a front, I get 30k overall power here. Front triggers as your first drive check also make it a lot easier to break through 2-to-passes, because you don't have to actively commit the power gain to your Vanguard to go for a 2-to-pass. It just happens inherently. You get the power gain on all of your front row. It's just a very powerful type of trigger. And this is a problem for draw triggers, because in addition to front triggers being valuable offensively, like when D first comes out, we of course don't have enough criticals to just go 12 critical, right? 11 critical because of over trigger, right? But front triggers are there, provide good offensive value, and are base 15k shield like criticals and heals, while draws are stuck at 5k. Then in DBTO2, that becomes even worse, because in DBTO2, we get the effect fronts, which have an additional 5k shield when your opponent's at grade 3 or greater, which pushes what you do with those last 3 trigger slots even harder towards front triggers, right? Like, even if you are a deck that attacks in such a way where you don't have any rearguard attacks after your Vanguard attack, right? And like as a result, you're not able to get full value out of a front trigger. Just the fact that it's still giving you the plus 10k, and its shield value is so much higher than the draw trigger, means that, yeah, you should probably be running these anyways, even if your attack pattern sucks for it. And then in DBTO3, we get the effect crits, which comes with also, you can only play 8 of a trigger type, which hard knocks in this decision point of what to do with the 3 last triggers if you're going max on crits and max on heals and your OT. And then DBTO4, we finally get the effect draws. And it's the exact same effect from the effect fronts of plus 5k shield, and that's just not enough. Pumping draw triggers to a 10k shield is just not enough, because like even a lot of the 1-card cards that exist in D format, because of the scaled up shield value, are asking for 15k shield. There's not a whole lot that asks for only 10k. And as a result, draw triggers kind of suck. They're not good. And that has been the state of things for the last like 4 years since DBTO4 came out. And now we are in the DZ16 reveals, and we get a new cycle of effect draws revealed. And these are, when placed on Guardian Circle, Soul Blast 1 or Energy Blast 2, it gets shield plus 10k unconditionally, And then if your opponent's grade is less than your opponent's Vanguard's grade, or your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, it gets shield plus 15k instead of 10 plus 10k. These I'm really happy about because it allows decks to actually consider draws on their merits as a trigger effect instead of the shield value that draw triggers are staple to. Obviously, not every deck can use these because some decks are too short on their soul or energy, and you need to be free enough on these resources that, like, in a given turn, if you have multiple of these in your hand, you're able to use multiple of these, or you could end up in some really, really crummy situations. But this is still really good. Even if it's limited to what sorts of decks can access it, this is still a really, really big upgrade and makes draws worth considering on their merits. Since they have equal shield value to front triggers now, and are 15 in the early game, they can even be 20k a bit earlier than front triggers can because of the additional, if your Vanguard's grade is less than your opponent's Vanguard's grade. So if your opponent went first and they're on grade 2 and they put up like a 23 column to your 8, you can represent 20k shield with this draw and guard that attack, which is really awesome. That's something that the front triggers can't do. Now the thing is that front triggers are still an overall stronger trigger type. I think front triggers are just extremely strong. So I think most decks, even decks that can pay these costs relatively easily, especially given that Vanguard decks are pretty prone to decking out in this current day and age, they will still opt for 8 crit 3 front. But this makes it a lot more viable, and I want to talk about some of the decks that I think this fits into. Because these cards are very exciting to me, and I think they really do fix like most of the issues that draw triggers have faced over the years. And I'm really excited for them. Like, I am a huge draw hater, and I'm excited to play with these draws. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how hard I have campaigned against putting draws in anything for a decade plus, outside of draw PGs. And these are draws that I want to try and force them into decks to see how they feel, because draws are a really powerful trigger type. Like, especially defensively, a defensive draw is very strong, and with their primary issue resolved in the decks that can afford the resource cost here, that is a really powerful trigger type to be using. So I think there are 2 categories of decks, within the ones that can afford these costs, of course, that these draws will fit very nicely into. The first category of deck is decks that fronts don't play well with. I'm thinking something like deep lands when I talk about this. Deep lands attack in such a way where if you check fronts on your first 2 drive checks, all you're getting out of it is 10k to your Vanguard. And fronts are only really impactful if you hit them on the 3rd check specifically. And that's not great. So if draws can offer me equivalent shield value, I would personally probably rather use a draw trigger in those 3 remaining trigger slots in deep lands. And Varga's historically another example, but I don't think that one applies so much anymore with the Mythish. And there have been several decks over the years that this kind of logic applies to, right? The other one, and the one I'm personally more excited to test, is decks that have like multiple inherent crit gain attacks. Because if you can put up several crit gains inherently in your deck, that means that you really don't need your critical triggers as much. And that offers up the possibility to run 3 crit, 4 front, 4 draw to have 8 20k shields. And 20k shields are so good, especially in the current design space where we're printing a lot of these like extra 10k shields from the board or from the drop or from the soul. And 20k shields pair very well with that because that's the equivalent of 2 normal triggers. And that guards a lot of stuff. So and like being able to like put up double 20k more easily is also pretty valuable. Yeah, I really I like that application a lot. So I'm going to go over a couple decks that I think are good places for these draws and where I've been personally trying them out. For the first category, we of course have deep lands. We just take out the fronts for the draws. We can't run Roderick. You do have to make a deck building concession in deep lands for this. You can't really run Roderick in a build using the new draws because you need your soul a bit more free. But I think that's fine. I think that's probably fine. This is where I'm at the moment with draw trigger using deep lands build. But the ones there's two I'm much more excited for. So this is Favrenil. Favrenil got some really powerful support in DZ15. I like this deck a lot. As soon as your opponent's on grade 3 or greater, you will be up on, where are you? Vanguard, who just inherently gets a crit and attacks twice. So you have multiple 2 crit swings every single turn. And as a result, you have much less need for actual critical triggers. Front triggers are of course very strong on a restanding Vanguard as well. So the going up to 420k fronts is pretty nice as well. And the draws give you more 20k. This actually adds an additional dimension to Favrenil that I will note because of the Soul Blast cost on this. So Favrenil, after your initial grade 3 turn where you have to build up enough soul, after that point you will almost always have excess Grazinger soul for your requirements, right? But one of the new support cards, Aegis Ferrum, this card can bind itself from soul to revive something from drop. However, almost all of your key pieces, like the main things that you would want to revive a lot of the time are either Margaris, who puts itself into soul, or another Aegis Ferrum, who puts itself into soul at end of battle. Both of these cards put themselves into soul. If you've found the Ace unit, that's a really good call that will persistently end up in drop. The Ace unit is okay, but doesn't get its effect when called from drop. But these are the main two that you would like to be calling out. But because they put themselves into soul, that can be awkward to line up because the deck just does not have any inherent soul blasting. Until now. Because now you can use these new draws to soul blast out those cards. And now you are chilling. The deck is also like pretty energy free, so the energy cost is also super free in the early game, so that's great as well. Yeah. You will like that's not always the case. You will often use energy costs on Nama or Belloc, but like the cost is free enough in this deck that it lines up well. And the other one, the one that's been testing extremely well for me, is Astashin. Astashin with the new DZ16 support. So Astashin is not a deck that currently typically presents multiple 2 crit swings. However, with the new upgrade boss card, Kachidoki, it is now a deck that can do that. Because the new act on Kachidoki is able to revive any blast from your drop zone, which includes Solitaria Frio, which gets a crit when called by an ability. So I have pretty frequently with this deck been doing formations where I go like, okay, on my first grade 3 turn, I go for Solitario, get some guaranteed shield, get a crit swing, cool. Now I have it in my drop on my next turn to revive with Kachidoki. Probably use the new blast order to revive Valgrowth, the Boulder Axe clone, and then I can do a formation that there are multiple different formations I can do that lead to me doing multiple 2 crit swings. Instead of doing 5 attacks, I can go for 2 different Solitario swings, like depending on what my opponent's damage is. If my opponent's at 4, I'll go Solitario first, then swing Kachidoki, call over, and have potential crit pressure over on my other guy that my opponent has to think about, which is a slight argument for going higher up on crits. And if my opponent's lower, I can go, okay, I will instead go Valgrowth first. They can take it if they want. Swing Kachidoki, call out another Solitario. So I have 2 Solitarios on my front rows. Both have additional crit. Both are 10k shields. And they both swing. Right. So that allows the deck to super easily present multiple 2-crit swings. And that's an important thing with going down on crits. Like, you either need to be a deck that's having a very hard time hitting good power numbers, and therefore, like, you need the fronts to, like, really get damage in, and you, like, crits won't be that threatening to begin with. Or you need to be a deck that has the damage reach that criticals would provide inherently, and does not need the higher chances of getting a higher reach that the max critical count would provide. So yeah, I do genuinely think that they have actually solved the core problem with draw triggers. I think this is a much less interesting solution, to be honest. I prefer draw triggers just inherently had 15k shield, and maybe we could do some unique trigger effects, and we can think about triggers from an actual deck building perspective of what effects they are providing. I would really like to see that in the new series. But in the current state of how triggers are handled in the game, I'm very happy about these draw triggers, because they have completely changed the viability of draw triggers in my mind. Yeah, there are multiple angles where these draw triggers are super worth running now, and that's great to see. Also, I have to say, a few times in my testing, I've had this scenario where I check one of these new draws, and I draw into another one of them, and it's like, that's the best feeling in the world. That's 40k shield that just got added to my hand. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. And yeah, the energy cost here is like, sometimes you will pay soul here in a session, but most of the time I'm paying energy, because the only energy cost in the entire deck is the ace unit. I don't need energy for anything else. So yeah, that's going to be it for me. This is Hunter Surge signing off.